My boss called me disloyal for refusing her dinner invitation, then fired me the next morning. What she didn't know was that I'd been recording our conversations for months. 3 days later, her husband called me with an offer I never saw coming. But the real shock was discovering I wasn't her first victim. My name is Edwin Blackwell. I'm 38 years old, and until that Thursday morning, I was the creative director at Sterling and Associates, a boutique marketing agency in Manhattan that managed campaigns for luxury brands like Cartier, BMW, and Rolex. Edwin, I think we need to discuss your commitment to this team, Rebecca Voss said, her voice carrying that familiar edge I'd learned to recognize over the past 2 years since she became CEO. I sat across from her glass desk, watching her perfectly manicured fingers tap against a leather portfolio. What exactly are you referring to, Rebecca? Last night's dinner invitation. Your refusal to join me for what could have been a very productive business discussion. The dinner invitation. She'd cornered me in the break room the previous afternoon, suggesting we continue our quarterly review over dinner at Le Bernardin, just the two of us. The way she'd touched my arm while making the suggestion, the lingering eye contact, the emphasis on privacy, everything about it had felt wrong. I explained that I had family commitments. I replied calmly. Rebecca's smile was ice cold. Edwin, successful people in this industry understand that business relationships require flexibility. Your attitude suggests a lack of loyalty to Sterling and Associates. What Rebecca didn't know was that our conversation was being recorded by the small device in my jacket pocket. What she couldn't have predicted was that this termination would trigger a chain of events that would destroy not just her career but her marriage and everything she'd built. 6 years earlier, Sterling and Associates had recruited me from a smaller agency with promises of creative freedom and work on prestigious accounts. The job delivered everything they'd promised. I developed award-winning campaigns, maintained client relationships that generated millions in revenue, and built a team of talented creatives who respected my leadership. Rebecca joined as CEO 2 years ago, replacing the retiring founder who'd built the agency's reputation on integrity and creative excellence. Rebecca brought a different philosophy, one focused on aggressive growth and whatever means necessary to achieve it. The first red flag came during my 6-month review under her management. She'd scheduled it for 7 p.m. on a Friday, long after everyone else had left. The questions started professionally enough: campaign performance, client satisfaction, team productivity. But as the evening progressed, her inquiries became increasingly personal. You work such long hours, Edwin. When do you find time for relationships? Does your wife understand the demands of our industry? Have you ever considered how much easier career advancement could be with the right mentorship? I deflected each inappropriate comment professionally, but the pattern was unmistakable. Rebecca was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before I'd either submit or push back. The Monday morning routine started 3 months after that review. Every Monday at 6:30 a.m. I began arriving early to back up my creative portfolio and client relationship files to personal cloud storage. Not theft. These were my original concepts and relationships I'd built over years of dedicated work. But more importantly, I started carrying a digital recording device to document our interactions. New York is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations without Rebecca's knowledge. Initially, it was insurance against potential false accusations. I had no idea how valuable those recordings would eventually become. The recordings revealed a pattern that extended far beyond my situation. Rebecca's comments about other male employees, her references to career advancement opportunities that came with unspoken conditions, her casual dismissal of harassment concerns from female staff members. One particularly revealing conversation occurred after our quarterly client meeting with Blackstone Luxury Brands, our biggest account worth $3.2 million annually. Rebecca had been unusually touchy during the presentation, placing her hand on my shoulder while discussing campaign strategies, standing closer than necessary while reviewing materials. Afterward, she'd called me into her office with an observation that crossed every professional boundary. "You handled that beautifully, Edwin. Richard Blackstone clearly respects your creative vision. Imagine what we could accomplish if you showed the same enthusiasm for our working relationship." That's when I realized I needed an ally inside the company. Someone who could provide perspective on whether Rebecca's behavior was isolated or part of a larger pattern. Sophia Pierce had been with Sterling and Associates for 8 years, working her way up from junior account coordinator to senior account manager through exceptional client management and strategic thinking. She was professional, observant, and most importantly, she'd worked under both the previous CEO and Rebecca. Our conversation happened during a late evening project review when most of the office had emptied. I mentioned feeling uncomfortable with some of Rebecca's management approaches, keeping my language carefully neutral. Sophia's expression immediately shifted to something between sympathy and anger. "Edwin, you're not the first person to come to me with concerns about Rebecca." Over the next hour, Sophia revealed a troubling pattern. 2 male employees had left Sterling and Associates abruptly during Rebecca's tenure, both citing personality conflicts with management. Both had been high performers with strong client relationships. Both had been replaced by less experienced candidates who seemed more receptive to Rebecca's management style. But Sophia's most disturbing revelation involved security footage. As senior account manager, she had access to building security systems for client confidentiality purposes. She'd noticed that Rebecca frequently stayed late on evenings when certain male employees were working overtime, entering their offices when they were away from their desks. She was going through personal items, desk drawers, computer screens left open, Sophia explained. "I started documenting these incidents because it felt like surveillance, not management." Sophia had been keeping records for months, timestamps of Rebecca's after-hours office visits, screenshots of her accessing employee files she had no business reviewing. The dinner invitation that would ultimately lead to my termination came during our Q3 performance review. Rebecca had been increasingly bold in her suggestions, commenting on my appearance, asking about my weekend plans, finding excuses for physical contact during routine interactions. "I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," she'd said, her hand lingering on my arm. "Le Bernardin has an excellent wine selection, and I know the sommelier personally. We could discuss your promotion timeline in a more relaxed environment." Every instinct told me to decline. The setting, the timing, the emphasis on privacy, everything about the invitation felt like a test I was destined to fail regardless of my choice. "I appreciate the offer, Rebecca, but I have plans with my family tonight." Her expression hardened immediately. "Family plans can be rescheduled, Edwin. Career opportunities cannot." "I understand, but I'm not available this evening." The next morning, Rebecca called me into her office with that leather portfolio already prepared. The termination was swift and absolute, effective immediately, citing lack of loyalty to the team and unwillingness to fully commit to the company's growth objectives. What she didn't anticipate was my preparation for exactly this scenario. As soon as I left the building, I contacted an employment attorney and began organizing 6 months of recorded conversations, documented incidents, and witness statements from Sophia. But the most unexpected development came 3 days later. My phone rang at 2:30 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar from the few times I'd met him at company events. "Edwin, this is David Voss, Rebecca's husband. I think we need to talk." David Voss was a prominent attorney specializing in corporate law, with a reputation for aggressive representation and meticulous preparation. The idea that he was calling me personally 3 days after my termination suggested something significant had changed in the Voss household. "I'm listening," I said carefully. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning? My office, 9 a.m. And Edwin, Bring any documentation you might have regarding your employment at Sterling and Associates. The meeting with David Voss revealed the scope of Rebecca's deception extended far beyond workplace harassment. David had discovered evidence that Rebecca was using Sterling and Associates as a vehicle for personal enrichment through inflated expense accounts, unauthorized client billing, and kickback arrangements with vendors. More damaging to their marriage, David had found evidence of Rebecca's pattern of pursuing relationships with male employees, including intimate text messages and hotel receipts that suggested her interest in workplace mentorship went far beyond professional development. The discovery that shook David most was finding a private investigator's report on my background. Rebecca had hired someone to research my personal life, family situation, and potential vulnerabilities. Information she could use to manipulate or blackmail me if needed. The report included details about my mortgage, my wife's career, even my children's school schedules. She was building a psychological profile to find pressure points, David explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. You weren't just an employee to her. You were a target she was systematically studying. The private investigator's files revealed that I was the third employee Rebecca had researched this thoroughly. The previous two, both talented creatives who'd left Sterling and Associates abruptly, had been subjected to increasingly aggressive manipulation campaigns before their departures. One had been transferred to impossible projects designed to make him fail. The other had discovered that Rebecca was spreading rumors about his personal life and to clients, undermining his professional reputation. Both had left the industry entirely rather than fight back. I'm filing for divorce, David stated matter-of-factly, but I need evidence of her professional misconduct to support my case. Your recordings could provide crucial testimony about her abuse of power and systematic harassment of employees. In exchange, David offered something I hadn't expected, a position as marketing director for his law firm's business development division. With a salary 40% higher than my Sterling and Associates compensation, and full legal support for any harassment claims against Rebecca. I provided David with copies of my recordings, documentation of Rebecca's inappropriate behavior, and Sophia's witness statements. Within a week, he'd filed harassment complaints with both the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and New York State Division of Human Rights. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Rebecca was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 3 additional employees came forward with similar harassment experiences. The state investigation uncovered financial irregularities that triggered a criminal inquiry. But the most satisfying revenge came through purely professional channels. Armed with my client, relationship files, and creative portfolio, I began reaching out to Sterling and Associates' major accounts from my new position at David's firm. Richard Blackstone from Blackstone Luxury Brands was particularly receptive when I explained the circumstances of my departure and the superior legal marketing services we could provide. Within 2 months, Blackstone had terminated their $3.2 million contract with Sterling and Associates and moved their business to our firm. 4 other major clients followed, representing nearly 60% of Sterling and Associates' annual revenue. Without their flagship accounts and facing ongoing legal challenges, the agency was forced to close within 6 months. Rebecca's personal and professional life collapsed simultaneously. The divorce proceedings revealed years of financial misconduct and infidelity. She lost both her marriage and her career, facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Sophia Pierce joined our legal marketing team as Senior Client Relations Manager, finally working in an environment where professional competence was valued over personal compliance with inappropriate demands. 6 months after my termination, I received a brief email from Rebecca's personal account. "You destroyed everything I built." I didn't respond. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and Rebecca had spent years avoiding the accountability that finally caught up with her. The recordings that began as protection against false accusations had become evidence of systematic abuse of power. The client relationships she'd tried to control had followed integrity rather than intimidation. Sometimes the most effective response to workplace harassment isn't immediate confrontation, but patient documentation and strategic preparation. Rebecca had built her authority on fear and manipulation, never considering that her victims might be building cases against her. The irony was perfect. Her attempt to force loyalty through inappropriate demands had created the very disloyalty she'd accused me of. By refusing to accept her terms, I'd discovered the evidence needed to ensure she could never impose those terms on anyone else. Professional misconduct thrives in silence and isolation. But when victims document abuse, find allies, and pursue accountability through proper channels, even the most powerful predators discover that their authority has limits. The transformation of my career exceeded every expectation. Within a year, our legal marketing division had grown from a small, experimental department to a major revenue generator for David's firm. The skills I'd developed managing luxury brand campaigns translated perfectly to positioning legal services for high-net-worth clients. More importantly, our success sent ripples through the marketing industry. 3 other agencies reached out seeking advice on implementing ethical workplace policies after hearing about Sterling and Associates' collapse. The story became a cautionary tale discussed in business schools and professional development seminars. Sophia thrived in her new role, eventually becoming my deputy director when our division expanded to include corporate communications consulting. She often remarked that working in an environment free from harassment and power games had unleashed creativity she'd forgotten she possessed. The legal proceedings against Rebecca concluded 18 months after my termination. She accepted a plea agreement that included financial restitution to former employees, community service, and a permanent ban from holding executive positions in New York-based corporations. The criminal charges were reduced in exchange for her cooperation in exposing vendor kickback schemes that had affected multiple agencies. But perhaps the most satisfying vindication came through industry recognition. The campaign I developed for Blackstone luxury brands won 3 major advertising awards, including the prestigious Cannes Gold Lion for innovative brand positioning. Rebecca's name appeared nowhere in the credits, though she'd tried to claim partial credit for concepts developed during my Sterling and Associates tenure. The awards ceremony provided a final moment of closure. Rebecca attended as a guest of another agency, clearly hoping to network her way back into the industry. When my name was announced as the Gold Lion winner, our eyes met across the room. Her expression of stunned recognition said everything about how completely the tables had turned. Success built on integrity always proves more durable than power gained through manipulation. Rebecca had taught me that lesson inadvertently, and I'd used it to build something far better than what she'd tried to destroy.